Hello and welcome to the EDRM Global Webinar channel. My name is Mary Mack. I'm the CEO and Chief Legal Technologist for EDRM. Today's webinar is InfoGov as a critical first step to the EDRM. It's sponsored by our Guardian Plus partner, RICO USA, and our faculty experts are Matt Mahan, Andrew Spett, and Eric Parrish. We welcome your questions and feedback in the council. This webinar will be recorded and available for replay at your convenience, as are all of our webinars. No paywall. We will also have some attachments and links for you that you can look at your leisure. They're inside the console there. So a little bit about our faculty. Returning faculty, Matt Mahan is the National Manager, Information Governance and eDiscovery Sales at RICO. Matt worked his way up in RICO, where he has served for well over a decade. He holds multiple certifications, including the CEDS, the IGP, and Info, and a bachelor's from UC San Diego in Mathematics and Applied Science. Matt is also well known with his co-presenter that I'll introduce in a minute for his emoji webinars. Welcome, Matt.
Thank you very much for having me, Mary.
Absolutely. We also have the illustrious Andrew Spett. He is an InfoGov specialist, eDiscovery. He's a CIGO, Chief Information Governance Officer. Let's say that. Let's say it that way. An IGP and an attorney. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. I'm very glad to be here.
And our friend Eric Parrish, he of the emojis, is an information governance specialist, eDiscovery as well at RICO. He also is a CIGO, an IGP, a CEDS, and an attorney. So we have got quite the faculty here today. Your questions are very, very important to us, so definitely put them into the console. And without further ado, welcome, Matt.
Thank you, Mary. Again, glad to be here today and talk about a subject that's near and dear to our hearts. And to kick it off, I'm going to pass it to Eric Parrish to take us a trip down EDRM memory lane.
Sure. Thanks, Matt. So the topic here is information governance as the critical first step in the EDRM. And so we want to ask, what is information governance and how does it relate to the EDRM? And I'll assume that everybody is familiar with what eDiscovery is at this point, but I think a definition of what information governance is before we get into a little bit of history and how it relates, because it didn't initially relate at all to the EDRM. But information governance, just get a definition out there, is been defined many ways over the years. But I think a good definition is a method to manage information by setting up policies, methods, and controls that collect, secure, and utilize information. But my favorite definition is by author Robert Smallwood, who says IG is security, control, and optimization of information. So that's what information governance is. And now, so how does it relate to the EDRM? So we'll start off with the memory lane trip here. And what we've got on the screen now is the very first EDRM. And you note there that it starts off with identification and a complaint. So it only is contemplating when you get hit with litigation to start moving across it. There's no acknowledgement of information management prior to that. If we move to the next slide for 2006, you can see that we have records management now comes up. Now there's an acknowledgement that in the eDiscovery world, how information is managed has an impact on the rest of the EDRM. We jump ahead again to 2009. And it's been broadened to information management. So we're getting bigger with it. Also, the triangles at the bottom were added in the previous version as well here, indicating volume and relevance. And then we skip forward to 2014, and information governance as a concept makes its first appearance in the EDRM. And it stayed that way for a number of years until we get to last year, 2020, and we have the IG reference model is now the first step in the EDRM. So that's how InfoGov relates to the EDRM. And it's critical because if you have good information governance policies and principles that you're abiding by, you're going to have a much better e-discovery experience. You're going to have lower cost. You're going to be able to find your information more rapidly. There's going to be less risk and less frustration. In short, you're being proactive about how you manage your information. Now, so if you have a mess, IG, you're going to have a mess in your eDiscovery. Now, here's the thing I want to highlight that gets people a little bit confused because there's a rhetorical trick here. The EDRM sets it up to look like eDiscovery is outside information governance, but at its heart here, if you're looking at the IG reference model, IG is the highest level, highest discipline of information management. So eDiscovery is actually a part of the information governance. It's not separate from, although we make it look like it is, it's really a part of it. So what we're really driving at here is what other aspects of IG drive a good eDiscovery lifecycle. And RIM is records and information management is the one that really drives that. And you can see there that that's part of IG. There's the other aspects, privacy, security, data governance that make it up. Thing to keep in mind is that the IG reference model is evergreen, and it shows the stakeholders and the life cycle of information. You will constantly be managing your information in a proactive way, where when you get to the right of this with the rest of the EDRM, you're only going to be in that part of it when you have litigation. So that's a big distinction between the two, but that's the way they sync up together. But RIM is really the part that is going to drive how you have a better eDiscovery experience with the benefits that I just laid out. I know Andrew wanted to touch on that.
Yeah, well, before we get into the RIM discussion, I just want to add a little bit to that conversation. So if we could flip back to the prior slide that shows both the IG, there we go, thank you. So a couple things. As lawyers, our obligations and certainly our objectives with our clients are to reduce risk, lower costs, and ensure compliance with regulatory and legal standards. And really, you're trying to accomplish the same thing in an IG program. It's the reduction of risk, the lowering of discovery costs, the lowering of compliance costs associated with compliance obligations or regulatory demands, and again, ensuring compliance with federal and state civil procedure rules when it comes to litigation. So what I just want to point out, and I think the conversation today is really going to focus and drill down into specific areas where information governance programs and having a good foundation is going to really impact the areas of identification, preservation, and collection that you see there on the EDRM. And then it's going to provide ancillary cascading downstream benefits to data processing when it comes to eDiscovery, data processing, review and analysis. Essentially, the reduction in volumes results in less data to review and therefore lower attorney fees. And then ultimately in production, again, reduction in volume equals reduction in cost. So turning to the records management piece of the IGRM, as ESI volumes have grown and grown, so too have the costs associated with responding to eDiscovery demands. And as these data volumes have exploded, organizations often are just losing track of where data is stored, what data is stored, and who owns data. Which complicates the process of identification and collection, again, referring to the EDRM. So a strong eDiscovery readiness program requires a strong records management program. And what you're seeing up on the slide right now is GARP, which is the Generally Accepted Record Keeping Principles, which essentially lays out the touch points that you want to establish in your records management program. There's got to be accountability, which really refers to having executive sponsorship and a committee leading your information governance initiatives. Transparency, which is your rules and procedures and protocols are available. They are understood. People are receiving training, etc. Integrity is essentially making sure that you're working with the most current valid version of a document. Protection goes into the security that you're building around your documentation, audit trails, access rights, etc. Compliance, and we'll talk a little bit more about certain compliance aspects as they relate to eDiscovery, such as retention scheduling, legal hold notification, et cetera. And then availability, retention, and disposition, we're going to really drill down into those. So I just want to back up for a moment. The International Organization for Standardization, or otherwise referred to as ISO, defines RIM, Records and Information Management, and it's an interesting definition, as the efficient and systematic control of the creation, receipt, maintenance, use, and disposition of records, including processes for capturing and maintaining, and this is where it's critical for us lawyers out there, maintaining evidence of and information about business activities and transactions in the forms of records. So, of course, when it comes to eDiscovery and the EDRM, that's what it's all about. It's all about reviewing evidence of and information about business activities. So having a records and information management program, having tools in place to assist with your records management processes and protocols is really a critical first step in ensuring that when it comes to litigation, that you're in a good place to get at your data quickly, efficiently, and without busting the budget. It's interesting that when we get to availability, which I would associate with identification in the EDRM, there are some really interesting statistics out there. On average, an employee spends about 400 hours per year searching for documents. Now, in addition, on average, about 2 to 5% of an organization's files are lost or misfiled, which essentially results in companies spending on average about $120 in labor to find a single misfiled document, and $220 in labor to reproduce a single lost document. So if 2 to 5% of an organization's files are lost or misfiled, and you're looking at between 120 and 220 to recreate a single document, you can do the math and you can see where the leakage is, where your cost overruns are stemming from in the absence of good records management policies. So what's sort of the first step? You've got enterprise content management, which is the systematic collection and organization of information to be used by a designated audience, which includes doc management, records management, image processing applications for digitizing hard copy records, social content, etc. And within that is a good doc management system. It's, again, sort of a critical foundation to aid you when you get to litigation. It's an automated system that's used to receive, track, manage, and store documents. The benefits of implementing a doc management system, particularly in the context of eDiscovery readiness, are enhanced security for your records, including access management, which I mentioned earlier, as well as audit trails, improved compliance, which ties back to automated retention scheduling, record classification, which makes finding and accessing records that much simpler and more efficient, and easier retrieval. In a doc management system, you'll have your data will be indexed, so it supports querying and retrieval. It extracts metadata values for searching, and oftentimes DMSs, hopefully, will include OCR capabilities, so you can search across your scanned images if you're going through a digitization process, which hopefully many are or certainly are considering. So going back to the benefits, of having a records and information management system, a DMS system in place on eDiscovery readiness, it really boils down to, in a nutshell, finding records faster and more efficiently, reducing the amount of time employees are wasting in searching for records, and all of which essentially results in saving costs. Eric, you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that was a great overview. I guess the only point that's very minor that I would put out there is sometimes when we have these conversations, people start thinking that this is a technology solution. And I just want to highlight that what we're talking about here transcends technology. Technology is an important aspect of it. You're going to utilize technology. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a moment. But IG is much broader than it's setting policies and really taking a hard look at what you're doing and how you're doing it. So I just wanted to put that out there that folks don't get stuck on software.
Yeah.
So moving on then, we take a look at the slide here. There are a number of things that we can delve into. And a key piece of this, dovetailing off of Andrew's RIM mentioning there, is that you need to have a retention schedule around your records. This is key. And so you have to have a drafted policy that lists what the record series are, what the retention period is, what the cutoff is, and what the disposition method is. You have that written, because what you're going to do is you're going to live by it. You're going to update it. You are going to audit it. You're going to communicate it to the field. You're going to make sure everybody is complying. And when you have that in place, what that allows you to do is to dispose of information that gets to that identification part right down there at the bottom. Because if you are able to flag what information you need to retain, what information you don't, and you're moving it out of your organization and defensively deleting it, it's never there to be identified in the steps to the right of the IG reference model. It never gets into your eDiscovery workflow. So you never have to process it. You never have to collect it. You never have to review it. And the cost savings there are tremendous. But the key is, you have to have all these, it has to be drafted and you have to live by it and keep it updated, because when you get challenged on missing ESI from opposing, you can show that it was disposed of per your records retention schedule. You're much more likely to avoid sanctions and have a problem. Now, the flip side, if you try and do this where you're like, uh-oh, we think that we're going to get sued, where's that records retention policy? Hey, we said we could dispose of this information, and now you start disposing of it, or you do it intermittently over time, it's going to be shown that you're not really utilizing it, and it's going to draw problems for you. In fact, there's two problems here. One, that you're not using your records retention policy all the time, and two, you should have been on legal hold because you had a reasonable anticipation of litigation. So you got two fouls right there. But that's the important part, to keep that schedule updated and live by it so that you can move things off and it never comes into your eDiscovery world. Now, it's not just records that we're going to be looking at. There's all sorts of other information out there. Unstructured data is what it's called. That's your emails. That's things that are on SharePoint. That's loose documents, Word, Excel, all of that information. You need to have policies around how long you're going to keep that. And one of the things that we see that we have, we call that rot. That is information that has no business value anymore. Redundant, obsolete, and trivial data. You want to manage that as well. And a good place to start is with email. And I think, although it's changing, everybody's shifting now, email is still kind of the core of what folks are looking to in an eDiscovery program when they're reviewing documents and look at what the other side has. Email is kind of where everybody tends to go. Text messages in the past several years have really come to the fore. People kind of understand now that that's something they need to look at. But there's all sorts of new data sources that are coming online. But you need to pay attention to the email. And people get like 126 emails per day on average. And if you manage that, you can eliminate it so that it's never discoverable. Only about 5% or maybe 40% in some organizations of emails are records. So you want to make sure people are flagging it as a record and storing it appropriately. But think about, for email in particular, how long do you want to keep it? Don't let people keep it forever. Do you want to just purge all your email unless it's on legal hold or it's a record after 90 days, 6 months, a year and a half? But if you have that in place, you're getting rid of so much information, and that's part of a good information governance program. Now, I would caution you, if you go with really short, like 90 days, your employees are going to think, wow, this is going to disappear, and I'm going to keep it, I'm going to print it off, or I'm going to put it on another drive so it doesn't disappear, and you're going to compound your rot problem because now you get duplicates, which is another thing to address as well. But that's the records retention planning and what you need to do to make sure that you avoid sanctions and avoid issues. So, Andrew, what would you add on to all of that?
Yeah. So, I think that there's a mantra. If you've defensively disposed of data, and you don't have it, then it's not discoverable. And you can back up your processes by showing that it's a documented, systematic process of defensively removing data from your systems. And I think the courts are very open to that discussion. So if it's not there, it can't be discovered. And I think that certainly helps, in the litigation. And also going back to the EDRM or the newest EDRM, where you see the volume triangle going down and the relevance triangle going up as you move through an information governance and the eDiscovery process. By following your retention schedule and executing, I think more importantly on your retention schedule, you are achieving those goals. You're reducing volumes, increasing the relevance of the data remaining on your system, certainly for business uses, and then certainly for litigation when it comes to having to collect and review that data. And again, thereby reducing the amount of time it takes to find those records, the amount of time it takes to review those records, and not to mention, obviously, the risk mitigation benefits of not hanging on to data longer than necessary.
Yeah, and there is another benefit that flows from that as well that's separate from cost savings and risk, and that is when you have your data house in order and you have less information because you've gotten rid of the rot and you've culled down the duplicates, so you only have what you really need. When you do get that litigation, you get that complaint, you're able to find the relevant information much quicker and much easier. You don't have to over collect and then sort, so that counsel can have the best information much earlier on in the process to make strategic decisions earlier. You might find that, wow, it looks like they've really got a good point here. They're only asking for X. What we're seeing, we should probably just settle right now. Or it allows you to create your theory of the case earlier on. You're just able to make better strategic decisions because you're more informed, because you don't have to fight through the mess of information that you otherwise would. That's another advantage that comes from having a good, clean data house and keeping things in order.
Yeah.
Andrew, thoughts on that?
Yeah, you're spot on. And I love the conversation about ROT because it's such an easy first step in, an information governance plan. Oftentimes when somebody thinks about coming up with an information governance program for their organization, it can seem so overwhelming. And there are small steps that can be taken that can have just outsized impacts on the organization that all are part of an information governance plan. And ROT is really it's like one of the first steps that can be taken with immediate ROI in an information governance program, which proves up the value of what you're trying to accomplish in an InfoGov program, not only immediately, but downstream when it comes to litigation and eDiscovery. I love my stats, and there's a statistic out there. It was a survey that was conducted by the Compliance, Governance, and Oversight Council, or otherwise known as CIGO-C, of course, their acronym, that roughly 69%, think about that, 69% of ESI stored by organizations has no legal, regulatory, or business value. It's an astounding percentage. And then if you remove that 69% and you look at the remaining 31%, only 25% of ESI has any real business value. And only 5% is retained as critical business records, with the remaining 1% retained due to legal holds. So if you think about that, if you've got 70% of the data in your infrastructure that's being stored by your organization really has no legal, regulatory, or business value, and you're wasting your time searching through that junk, or what Eric rightly referred to as ROT, redundant, obsolete, or trivial data, that's 2/3 of your data, and you're wasting time and energy sorting through and finding and reviewing material that 2/3 of which, every 2 docs out of 3 is just going to be junk. It's a waste of time. So if you want to tackle your rot, there's a couple first steps called basically file analysis. You do some data mapping, you do some hard copy inventorying, and you can use an automated file analysis tool, which essentially provides you the ability to locate, identify, classify, and dispose of rot. And the net effect is that you're reducing the organization's information footprint, which again allows for potentially relevant ESI to be located and identified quickly and efficiently. Eric, any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll throw another stat out there because I really like this one to kind of go on your statistics train there. Only 1% of information that is created is ever referenced again after 15 days. All of that information is it's no business value very rapidly. It's not like it takes months. It's very quickly that it has no value, because you have to think about somebody sending you, hey, you want to go grab lunch? I mean, that only has value in that instant. Beyond that, it's worthless at that point. So how many communications do you have of that nature, or an email that says, thanks, that's the response? It's just full of things like that. So that's how you can get rid of it. Now, Andrew touched on file analysis, and this is a technology solution. So coming back to the technology piece, as he mentioned, it is a tool that analyzes, indexes, searches, tracks, and reports on file metadata, as well as file content, all of it, so that you can search the entire content of a document to find what you need, find out who's accessing it, where it's living. You can actually insert metadata as well, so you can clean up your data house as you're moving along. And one of the big pieces that it does beyond removing that data that is worthless is it will show you where duplicates are. So all the employees are storing, for instance, an employee handbook or some similar type of file. You can set it up so that you have one source of truth and everybody has to link there. That's a better way to do it. File analysis will show you where all of your duplicates are across the organization so that you can remove those, because that's a large source of rot, is having that duplicate information out there. File analysis will also help you find lost files, so you're less likely to have a surprise. You might say, this is where all these documents should be that are relevant to the litigation, but maybe there's something that's out in the wild that's escaped and it's relevant. You want to know that now at the beginning. You don't want to wait until you're several months or however long into your litigation, and then this piece of information that could be potentially hot pops up only because it wasn't stored where you thought it needed to be. With file analysis, it's going to tell you where those items are so that you can collect everything that you need for your litigation when you're getting started. So there's 2 ways that it's useful. 1, cleaning up your data house. And number 2 is making sure that you find everything that is relevant to the litigation, and then you can cull it down. The other thing that it helps you with is with legal hold. No more do you have to put entire mailboxes or entire groups of data on hold. Since it zeroes in on the information that's relevant, you can put those documents on hold, and those documents specifically. And that's one of the great advantages of a file analysis as well. So Andrew, thoughts on that as well?
Well, you touched on something that reminded me of a client that we were working with. Where we ran file analysis on their infrastructure. And what we discovered for them was that they had an employee who had gone in and changed metadata values on some audio files and some movie files. Nothing inappropriate, but he was essentially storing his personal data on the company's infrastructure. And he had changed the dates in the metadata values to like 2050. So it wasn't appearing in normal searches when they were running searches. And it was just way off in the future, and it didn't exist as far as the system was concerned. But by running file analysis, we were able to find that data and notify the company. And of course, they took whatever remedial actions they had to take to fix it and get that employee to get his personal stuff, his personal data off their system. So, it works, and it reduces ultimately those types of risks in addition to, reducing the volumes of data you're storing.
Yes. That reminds me of a for instance as well, although it's slightly off from litigation. It's relevant to what file analysis can do. Working with a client where they were losing millions of dollars a year from people referencing wrong contracts, whether it was something that they were putting together as a new contract, sales was using the wrong one, or they were obligated and already been executed. They were referencing the wrong ones. And with file analysis, they were able to go out and find where all these versions of contracts were and rein them in and get rid of the ones that weren't relevant, that were outdated, see what their obligations really were, and make sure that they had that data house in order. So that is a for instance there with that. Now, I don't want people to get hung up thinking of that, again, technology is the answer to everything, because, going back to, it's only a part of what you need to do in an information governance program. Talking with everybody is still very important, and part of doing a information governance maturity assessment, we come in and consultants would come in and look at your entire environment and assess where you are, where you're strong, where you're weak, where you can improve. One of the things that's done there is speaking with employees. Like, how do you use your information? Where do you store it? What applications are you utilizing? So file analysis does not knock that out of the park. That's still in play. And obviously that's something you do in litigation as well. So it applies on both sides of the house. So I just want to bring it back that still people are a very important part of this. And this is not going to be a technology-driven solution. It's all about collaboration. If you look at the IG reference model, that is a map that is showing the stakeholders and how they are working together, how they should work together to make sure that everything is handled appropriately. So again, if you look at it, you've got business creating the documents where they see value, or the information they see value. Legal sees risk with the same information to make sure it's retained appropriately. Records and information, again, sees risk, making sure that things aren't lost that need to be retained. IT saying, we don't know what has value, we have to look to the other divisions. So let's all talk to have this conversation so we know what to keep for how long and where. And so again, just coming back to this is a people collaboration process, not a technology piece.
Yeah.
Andrew.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Again, it's the technology or the tools, but ultimately, in order to achieve these objectives, an organization needs to go in with a plan, with a committee, with people that are going to be held accountable, both at the top at the top of the initiative, on down through the individual departments, so that an information governance framework can be put into place, followed, adhered to, and as Eric mentioned, earlier on in the discussion, it's evergreen, so it's constantly evolving. It needs to be constantly audited, reviewed, updated, but the ancillary benefits, are just so tremendous that it's really, really critical to be thinking about this, not only for the organization as a whole and for its business practices, but of course, and tying back into the theme of this discussion, for when it comes to litigation. Too often, litigation is a fire drill, and it just doesn't need to be that. And when it's a fire drill, it's a 5-alarm fire, and everybody's rushing, to kind of put out the fire. And that's where, again, your costs drive up, things are getting missed. It can be done better and cheaper and faster. So it's something to think about. And I just want to touch on this. A lot of what we're talking about is at the organization level. But I think for outside counsel, this is a really great avenue to go into to bring added value to your clients. Litigation attorneys, outside counsel are so busy. They're juggling multiple cases. And it's hard to find the time. But where you can, if you can counsel your clients on an information governance plan, on some of these approaches that we've discussed, you're going to, first of all, help them when it comes to when they do get sued and they have to go through eDiscovery. And you're also adding value as their attorney. So you're setting yourself apart from all the other firemen just chasing down fires.
Right, right. And you just said something talking about sponsorship. That is incredibly important. In fact, if you're looking to implement an IG program, it is the most important variable that you can latch onto, is having somebody in the C-suite, general counsel, whomever, that says, I am going to own this initiative, this information governance initiative, because I see the benefit in it. And that person can then have other folks beneath them that can implement it. But you need that backing from very high up in the organization, because undertaking an IG transformation is just that. It's a transformation, and questions that have never been asked are going to be asked. The old ways of doing things are going to be upended. And as we all know, people are resistant to change, and there's a lot of change that can come with an IG program. It can be very upsetting for folks, particularly those that have been there for an organization for a long time, much more resistant. And if you don't have that executive sponsorship to drive it, you're going to run into troubles, because people break into factions, and then you've got different goals that can come out from different departments. And that all, again, going back to the IG reference model, that all has to be coordinated. And without somebody sponsoring it, it's just not going to happen. Now, I don't want to scare you, because not all IG programs need to be from the very top of the organization. You can bring it down to just a departmental level, very small, and maybe you just get a sponsor for that department who can drive it across the department. You're still going to have the same resistance that this is a lot of change and questions are being asked, and quote, I don't like it. You're going to find a lot of that, but that sponsor at the departmental level can drive it. And a good way to start, Andrew mentioned this earlier, is to just start with a small project like getting rid of the rot. You can say to folks, we're going to start with cleaning up our email. That's going to get a lot less resistance. And then once that small project is successful, then you can expand it to a new one. And what we have seen is that when projects are successful at a departmental level, then the benefits accrue. That department starts talking about it. Other departments, other people start asking, hey, how can we do that too? And it starts to grow. So wouldn't necessarily think of an IG program as always starting out at top down. It can start from bottom up if you're thinking small. So I'll take a pause there, Andrew. See what you got thoughts around that.
At the risk of being cliche here, it's the old adage that every journey starts with the first step. And so if you can get those first early wins, prove up the objective, establish that there was ROI, then that just feeds into your next initiative, and you build on that and grow upon it, and ultimately obtaining credibility. You've got support, and that should feed then into hopefully a larger information governance plan push within the organization. So. What you're seeing up on screen here is essentially, what the net effect provides. You've done everything that we've talked about. You've implemented records and information management framework. You're addressing enterprise content management. You've completed data mapping. Are established and are executing upon a retention schedule. You've done file analysis, disposed of rot, et cetera, et cetera. All of that. Ultimately, again, we kind of keep hammering on this point, is results in your being able to find records more efficiently and in a more surgical and targeted fashion. And so when litigation hits at the organization level, you can go in and hopefully conduct early case assessment. You're understanding what the claims are being made against you. You can go into your systems. You can identify who holds the records that might be of value. You can then identify who needs to go on legal hold and what needs to go on legal hold. You can develop your theories of the case early on. When the discovery requests start coming in, you can quickly identify the data that's particularly relevant, not necessarily responsive, but at least relevant to the demands, so that when it comes time to preserve and collect, it's all there. And we talk about in eDiscovery, we talk when it comes to collection, we talk about full forensic images or targeted collections. You may have, those of you with experience may be familiar with this. By conducting ECA at the organization level, you're able to often, I'm not going to say always, but often conduct a more targeted collection, again, which all feeds into reducing your eDiscovery costs and focusing your outside counsel's attention on data that really matters, and not flipping through happy birthday messages or golf invites.
Right. Excellent. So another topic I want to touch on that flows into this is preservation of legal hold. I touched on it earlier, but this is an important concept, and part of a good IG program is how are you managing legal holds. There's still a number of organizations out there that are still managing holds with spreadsheets, and that's becoming less and less defensible because you're not reminding folks, there's no checking in, there's no verification that they actually put the information on hold. And so that's just becoming less defensible. And the old just tap on a shoulder in the hallway, put that on hold, that's still out there as well. That's definitely not working. So you need to look at legal hold as part of your IG program. And I think historically there was resistance to using a tool because they were perceived as expensive, but that's no longer the case. There are very good tools that are not expensive at all that will allow you to put information on hold that you found from file analysis, so you know what to put on hold, that will make sure that individuals have gotten the hold, that they acknowledge what they need to do, that they're reminded that this information is on hold. You can see that they put things on hold, and that it takes things off of hold when you get to the end rather than keeping them in perma hold. So these are some things to keep in mind when you're thinking about legal hold, that you can automate it and feed it and work with your file analysis tool. Now, another way that file analysis helps here is when you're talking about needing to put things on hold, you're going to talk to your employees, potential custodians. What is often overlooked is people that left the organization, or SharePoint sites that were utilized for a month but abandoned, and it's got information on it. That oftentimes is missed, and it'll make you have to go back and recollect later on, and that incurs more cost. But if you use file analysis, you're going to find all of that information from people that have left, or the data still there, or those other orphaned data that is relevant, so that you can put that and feed that into your legal hold solution. So those two tools work well together to help save cost and eliminate a lot of frustration as well, because there's nothing worse than, oh wow, we've got to go back and do it again. Nobody wants to be in that position.
Yeah, I think the software really helps, to automate your notifications, tracking those notifications, who's responded, who hasn't. You can automate the questionnaires that go along with it. The follow-ups that need to go out. Hey, you haven't acknowledged that we sent you this legal hold notice. You need to acknowledge within X period of time. And then ultimately providing audit trails so that your entire process is buttoned up, right? It just is challenge proof if you're utilizing some sort of automated software as opposed to a manual process. Excel, the days of Excel sheet tracking are just long gone. There's no reason any longer, certainly not from a cost standpoint, to continue doing legal hold in a manual manner.
Excellent. I think that we've got the final slide here is just highlighting again what we've discussed, that when you look at the EDRM with the IG reference model at the start, the whole goal is to reduce that volume of information that needs to go into the right side of the EDRM, so that you're not putting that information in. And as we mentioned several times now, many benefits that accrue from having the far left in order. It ensures that the right side is in order, that you're reducing what you have out of the gate. You're only looking at the most relevant information, best decisions, lower costs, less frustration, and just a better process all around. Now, again, coming back to this, the right side of the EDRM is only a sometimes. You're not always going to have litigation necessarily, unless you're a large enough organization, and maybe you never get out of it, but not all organizations are that size. But the left side, the IG reference model, is forever and evergreen and always. It's not a project. It never stops. You're constantly improving your processes and making sure that everything is being handled appropriately. The right side is a sometimes kind of thing for many organizations.
Yeah. Yeah, so we appreciate the time and your attention. I think that at this point we can probably open it up to questions. If anybody in the audience has some thoughts, questions they want to ask.
Yeah, and Drew and Eric, great job. I didn't want to interrupt you. You guys were spot on with a lot of your points. One point you made, Drew, was regarding to 400 hours of time per year for an employee finding documents. I think it's important to tie back to the emotional impact to a proper IG program as well. I mean, imagine that's 20% of an employee's time. Think of the loss of employee engagement and productivity resulting from that frustration by not being able to find the information they need to complete a critical business task. So think about that overall productivity. We talk about mitigation of risk and saving of costs, but improved productivity and creativity and employee engagement is another benefit to good IG.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matt. And just as Eric mentioned, that the EDRM is only occurs when there's litigation. The benefits of having an information governance framework in place, of having records and information management practices, those are evergreen. That happens every day, all day. If you're able to recover those 400 hours that a single employee is spending searching for a document and convert that 400 hours into productive activities, those are huge benefits for the organization's business, period.
Yeah, I would actually argue that time is higher because that's only counting the time that they're searching. There's a switching cost that's involved where that takes them off of the productivity, and then they get out of it, and when they're done searching, they're not going to jump right back in to being productive. There's going to be that switching cost that underlays it, so it's actually higher than that. And I see a question about legal hold and versioning. When you're in legal hold using an automated product, one of the advantages is when you put a document on hold, that one's on hold. If somebody comes along and works on it and makes changes to it, that version is also, a copy is kept of that as well. So every time the document is still live to be worked on, but every time there's a change, that change gets captured. So going back to what Drew had said about auditing, you can see what the document looked like when it was put on hold, and then how it has evolved over time. And all of those versions are preserved and on hold. So you get a better idea of what's going on. And again, it's more defensible, because you can imagine that if you put something on hold and they're not deleting it, but they're changing it, that's going to cause some issues if you've only got the initial version and there's been changes along the line, but you haven't captured those versions. So hopefully that answers that question. Yeah,
well, I want to add to that. So it's important to be aware of hold in place technology. Not all legal hold applications out there offer that. So if that's something that you're interested in, hold in place and versioning, as Eric just described, then it's important to not assume it's included, but ask the provider that you're discussing, your legal hold application with, whether they offer that feature.
Yeah, another question that came in associated with getting started with an information governance program. As you alluded to, it can start small within a department, but if you are trying to get the attention of the C-suite, they say timing is everything. With the global pandemic, with people working remote, digital transformation happening all over the place, would you take advantage of now to get something started?
Yes, absolutely. I think now is a great time, since everybody is reevaluating their processes and their procedures and what they're doing. This has taken everybody out of the everything is just fine mentality, and there's an appetite, more of an appetite for change than there has been historically. And so getting the attention of the C-suite, one is cost savings. That's one. Not all organizations really care about that. As strange as that might sound, that isn't always a primary driver for some organizations. Two, there's the ECA point that you're going to be more informed in your litigation, more likely to have better outcomes. But number three, when you distill your data down to only what's has value and what's relevant, you're going to start to make connections and see patterns and derive business intelligence that you otherwise would not have seen. So that's a benefit that's outside the EDRM litigation here, but it's an InfoGov benefit that when it's tight, you can see better what you have and make those connections rather than drowning in a sea of irrelevancy where it's impossible to make those connections.
Yeah.
Drew, anything to add to that?
No, I mean, I think Eric nailed it. Eric, in your answer right there reminded me of, in a sense, the data integrity work you're doing with your client right now, which is, they're being sure that they're working on the most current version. They initiated their approach. They initiated this objective during the COVID lockdown. And they were leaking millions of dollars. I think it's spot on. Can you describe a little bit about what you're doing with that client?
Yeah, we're utilizing file analysis, and there's been interviews with various custodians as well. But at this point, it's file analysis to go out and find where all those contracts are and which ones are outdated, and creating a source of truth, saying this is where contracts live. These are the important ones. These are the relevant ones. These are the ones we should be referencing and using, and deleting and getting rid of the contracts that shouldn't be in play. Now, obviously, if they've been executed, they're not getting rid of them, but templates for new contracts are being removed. The other thing that file analysis does is that it spots rogue contracting. Do you have departments or people that are contracting with vendors outside of the approved processes, and your organization is on the hook and you don't even know it? File analysis, and again, having those custodian interviews is going to help you spot that and get in front of it and shut it down. So that's kind of how it can help in the contract space.
And what about new IG initiatives associated with maybe in the rears as people adjusted and had to be agile during the pandemic and transform and do business? Maybe they didn't properly vet business applications, didn't have retention and disposition schedules in place, weren't sure, hey, can we actually collect this information, search and collect? Have you seen some new programs or IG initiatives in the rears to clean up some of that pandemic-related chaos and new applications and way of doing business?
Yeah, I think, there are clients out there that are realizing that, particularly with employees working from home and gaining access to data, that it's really important to clean up the data behind the firewall, and so that employees are able to quickly and efficiently access the records they need to conduct their daily business. And again, I think that it all sort of boils back down to conducting file analysis, and reducing your data storage, reducing your footprint so that your employees can access, their records quicker and efficiently. And I think that, the pandemic's really brought sort of the challenges to the forefront, because people were no longer, in the office and didn't have alternate means of getting at data. They were relying on what was available on their computer, their access, into their network, and their ability to access, particular file systems that they didn't have to think about, when they were on-prem.
It's a great point. Availability became highlighted during the pandemic.
Yeah.
Something else to bear in mind is there are a lot more data sources coming online now with being remote. Teams and Slack, although they've been around for a bit, the uptake on them has been tremendous, obviously. And you need to make sure that you're going to be able to collect from those platforms effectively. There's certain platforms where if you're not using the right version or the right paid version, you can't collect from it. To have those conversations around those non-traditional data sources that are being used now as a result of the pandemic, to get policy around them as well, because you certainly don't want to be in litigation and realize you forgot a source, or two, that you're not going to be able to collect as quickly as you need to in order to comply. So there's all sorts of things now that are coming along. And I would extend this even further. This isn't pandemic related, but the Internet of Things. There are so many devices that are connected to the internet now. They are also creating data, and I think we're past the point now where things are creating more data now than humans are. So have a conversation with what devices do we have that are creating information that we need to collect as well, because the days of just email, Word, and Excel are rapidly closing. The pandemic has just intensified these non-traditional data source use.
Yeah.
That's another hour-long discussion, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, I think that wraps up the questions. Mary, anything that you'd like to add or close?
Well, I definitely want to add some things. We've got your contact information up on the screen. We've got emails and LinkedIn's for all three of you. And so I just want to thank our Guardian partner, where you gentlemen hail from, our Guardian Plus partner, Rico USA, for making you, Matt, Andrew, and Eric available to us. Thank you, gents, for your wonderful presentation, and our thanks to the EDRM community for your kind attention. See you next time on the EDRM Global Webinar channel.